A single mother was fired from work because she brought her homeless triplets boys, age 4, alongside with her to work. The single room. The heat did not simply fill the single room. It was a permanent, oppressive tenant. It rose from the rust-stained concrete floor, seeped through the corrugated zinc roof baking under the Lagos sun, and thickened the air until it felt like breathing soup. For Adesawa, the heat was a secondary nuisance. The primary weight, the one that truly constricted her chest each dawn, was the silence. For years, 1,460 days of waking up to this quiet, broken only by the distant cacophony of Suralere, the blaring of Danfo horns, the cries of hawkers, the gossip of neighbors sharing a balcony. But in her own cubicle, there was a profound, aching absence. It was the absence of giggles, of pattering feet, of the sweet, chaotic chorus of "Mama" that should have greeted her mornings. Her room was a monument to bare necessity. 10 by 12 feet of space that held her entire adult life. A thin mattress lay in one corner, covered with a faded Ankara spread. A small, two-ring electric stove sat on a wooden plank next to a plastic bucket of water. A few clothes hung behind a floral-patterned curtain. But the most prominent fixtures were not physical. They were the 3 small, rectangular spaces on the wall, cleared of peeling paint. In each space was a photograph, lovingly framed in cheap plastic. Combe, his smile a gap-toothed declaration of joy. Koma, his eyes wide with thoughtful curiosity. Komi, caught mid-chortle, a dimple etched deep in his cheek. Her triplets, her lions, her heart, living outside her body in Ikoridu. Adesawa pushed herself up from the mattress, her joints protesting. The day began as every day did, with a ritual of remembrance. She walked to the wall, her fingers lightly tracing each small face. "Good morning, my heart," she whispered to Combe. "Did you sleep well, my clever one?" To Koma. "No trouble for Ani today, to Komi." She could almost smell their scent, a mixture of baby powder, fresh sweat, and boundless promise. A phantom feeling of their small arms around her neck made her own throat tighten. She moved to the small window, pushing the louved blades open to a view of a narrow, bustling alley. A woman below was frying akara, the pungent, savory smell cutting through the humidity. Children in mismatched uniforms scurried past, their backpacks slapping their backs. Adesawa's breath hitched. Her boys should be among them. They should be here, in this room, making it messy and loud and alive. Instead, they were 30 kilometers and a world away, being dressed by Aunt Ibanabo, fed by her, loved by her. The guilt was a familiar, corrosive companion. It had gnawed at her the day she made the decision, for years ago, in a hospital bed surrounded by the overwhelming miracle of 3 tiny, crying lives. It had screamed at her as she bundled them up, just weaned, for the journey to Ikoridu. Aunt Ibanabo, her mother's elder sister, had opened her arms and her 2-room apartment. "They will be my own," she had said, her voice firm with kindness. "You go to Lagos and build a foundation. A mother cannot build a house with her babies on her back." The logic was sound, Lagosian, and practical. It broke Adesawa completely. Leaving them felt like amputating her own limbs. She remembered kneeling by the old foam mattress where they slept, pressing her lips to each forehead, drinking in their milky scent, her tears falling on their tiny brows. "Mama will come back," she had promised, her voice shattered. "Mama is doing this for you." Now, she was a weekend mother, a visitor bearing gifts and strained cheer. The bus fare to Ikoridu was a luxury budgeted for every other week. Those Saturdays were her paradise and her purgatory. The sheer, explosive joy of the reunion, the tackle hugs, the squeals, the feel of their solid, growing bodies, was always followed by a creeping shadow. As the sun began to dip on Sunday, a dreadful quiet would fall over the boys. Koma would cling to her leg without speaking. Combe would ask, with a brave frown, "Mama, why can't you stay?" Komi would simply bury his face in her neck and weep. The return journey to Lagos, in a crowded, rickety bus, was a slow immersion back into the silence. She would clutch the new drawings they scribbled for her, stick figures with a large mama, and stare out at the speeding greenery, feeling a piece of her soul tear away with each kilometer. Back in the single room, the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with echoes. In the sizzle of her frying egg, she heard their laughter. In the drip of the leaky tap, She heard a whimpered mama. At night, the loneliness was a physical weight on her chest. She would curl around a pillow, pretending it was the warm, sleeping form of one of her sons, and cry soundlessly into the fabric, her prayers a desperate mantra. God, let my sacrifice not be in vain. Let me find a way to bring them home. Just let me hold on. She dressed for another day of hustling. She had a temporary job as a cleaner at a small office in Yaba. The pay was meager, but it covered her rent, her food, and the crucial savings she sent to Auntie Ibanabo for the boys' upkeep. Every naira was a brick in the foundation she was trying to build. As she locked her room, her eyes fell once more on the photographs. The sun had shifted, casting a beam of light directly on Komi's dimpled smile. A fragile warmth bloomed in her chest, pushing back against the despair for just a moment. I am doing this for you, she whispered again to the silent images, her voice a blend of vow and vulnerability. One day, this room will be too small for all of us. One day, the silence will end. I promise. She stepped out into the chaotic, sun-drenched alley, squaring her shoulders against the weight of the day and the heavy, silent love that waited for her return. The single room, with its heat and its ghosts, was not just a shelter. It was the crucible where a mother's hope was being tested, forged, and desperately kept alive. The flyer of fate. The office in Yaba was a tomb of dust and discarded ambition. Adesawa moved through the cluttered spaces with a quiet efficiency, her mind a world away in Ikoridu. She polished the glass top of the managing director's empty desk, seeing not her own reflection but the face of Combe, trying to be brave as she left. She vacuumed the faded carpet in the open-plan area, the drone of the machine drowning out the memory of Komi's Sunday cries. The work was mindless, a physical ache in her muscles that was a welcome distraction from the deeper, constant ache in her soul. At the end of each day, the manager, a perpetually harried man in a too-tight shirt, would hand her 500 naira. It felt less like a wage and more like a slow, careful bleeding of her future. One Thursday, the emptiness in the room pressed harder than usual. The director was out, the few staff were on a lunch break, and the silence was profound. As she wiped down the smudged window overlooking the frantic Yaba Junction, a cascade of pure, yearning loneliness washed over her. Her knees felt weak. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging a small circle. What am I doing? The thought was not new, but today it carried a sharp, existential edge. She was 32 years old. Her children were growing in another woman's home, learning words, forming memories where she was only a guest star. She was treading water in a city designed to drown the poor. The foundation she was building felt less like concrete and more like sand, slipping through her fingers with every passing week. She needed a miracle, not the dramatic, parting of the Red Sea's kind, but a small, tangible crack in the wall of her circumstance. A door. Any door? Her shift ended. With the 500 naira folded carefully into her bra for safety, she joined the human river flowing out of the office block and onto the streets. The air was thick with exhaust fumes, suya smoke, and the collective sweat of a million hustlers. She walked towards the bus stop, her body on autopilot, her spirit weary. It was then that she saw it. A flash of white amidst the grimy gray of a collapsed transformer housing. A flyer, half torn, fluttering in the hot breeze generated by a passing danfo. Instinct, or perhaps desperation, made her bend and pluck it from where it was caught on a twisted piece of wire. The paper was cheap, already softening with humidity, but the words were printed in bold, commanding black ink. Reliable live-in housekeeper needed. Must be exceptional, discreet, and of impeccable character. For a luxury residence on Cooper Road, Victoria Island. Competitive salary. Accommodation provided. Apply in person at the gatehouse. Ask for Mr. Briggs. Victoria Island. Cooper Road. The words were from another Lagos, a Lagos of silent, tree-lined streets, towering gates, and air-conditioned dreams. A competitive salary could mean anything, but accommodation provided. Those three words ignited a spark in her chest, so sudden it was painful. Accommodation provided. A place to sleep that wasn't this single, silent room. A place where, maybe, just maybe, she crushed the thought before it could fully form, afraid to hope. But her fingers tightened around the flyer, smudging the ink. A live-in position meant leaving Suralire. It meant her entire life would be the job. but it also meant saving every kobo of her rent money. It meant a potential salary that wouldn't vanish on transportation. It was a gamble, a leap into the unknown service of a faceless, wealthy owner. The bus ride home was a blur. Back in her oven-like room, she sat on the mattress with the flyer laid carefully before her, weighed down at the corners with a cup, her phone, a small Bible, and a tub of shea butter, the only anchors she had. She read the words aloud, her voice a whisper in the quiet. Must be exceptional. Was she exceptional? At cleaning, at organizing, at making order from chaos? Yes. She had turned this bleak cubicle into a sanctuary. She had managed the care of 3 infants with the precision of a general, even from afar. She was resilience personified, discreet and of impeccable character. Her life was a study in discretion. She carried her sorrow privately, her shame silently, her hopes in a locked chamber of her heart. Her character was all she had left. The spark grew into a small, steady flame. This wasn't just a job. It was a thread, thrown across the chasm that separated her life from the life she needed for her sons. She had to grasp it. That night, she prepared. She washed and ironed her best outfit. A sensible navy blue skirt suit she'd bought for a long-forgotten interview years ago. She polished her only pair of low-heeled shoes until they shone. She rehearsed answers to questions she imagined a stern manager would ask. Why do you want this job? To build a better future for my family. What are your strengths? Diligence, honesty, and a deep need to prove worthy of this chance. Sleep was impossible. The heat was joined by a nervous, fluttering energy. She stared at the photographs, lit by the weak glow of a street lamp filtering through the window. My lions, she whispered. Mama is going to try something. It might be nothing, but it might be everything. The journey to Victoria Island the next morning felt like crossing into a foreign country. The crowded, potholed streets of Surulere and the mainland gave way to the smooth, wide expanses of the Lekki Expressway, then the manicured grandeur of Six. The air even smelled different, less of open drains and more of salt from the Atlantic and the subtle perfume of money. Finding Cooper Road, she felt profoundly out of place. The houses were not houses. They were fortresses set back behind high walls crowned with coiled razor wire and security cameras. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The gatehouse for the address on the flyer was a small, neat structure beside a pair of immense, black, wrought iron gates. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she smoothed her skirt and approached. A security guard in a crisp uniform eyed her. Yes, madam. I am here to see Mr. Briggs, she said, her voice thankfully steady. About the housekeeper position. He nodded, spoke into a walkie-talkie, and a moment later, a side door to the gatehouse opened. Mr. Briggs was a man who seemed constructed from the same material as the gates he managed, iron-willed and unyielding. He was in his 50s, with a close-shaven head and eyes that assessed her instantly, missing nothing, from the quality of her polished but old shoes to the determined set of her jaw. Adesawa, she said, introducing herself. He didn't offer a hand. The flyer. It wasn't a question. She handed over the crumpled paper. He glanced at it and back at her. Live in. Means you stay here. No going out at night without permission. No personal visitors. Ever. The owner is overseas, but the standards are absolute. The house is 8,000 square feet. Marble, silk, antiques. You will be responsible for maintaining it in a state of permanent readiness. One speck of dust is a failure. Do you understand? His tone was designed to intimidate, to weed out the faint of heart. Adesawa met his gaze. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, stronger, was the image of 3 little faces. I understand, sir. I am not afraid of hard work. I am very thorough. He asked a few curt questions about her experience. She spoke of office cleaning, of managing a home. But mostly, she spoke with a quiet conviction about her respect for order and cleanliness. She did not mention her children. The words, no personal visitors, had sealed that part of her story away. Finally, he stood. Wait here. He disappeared into the main compound. Adesawa stood in the cool, air-conditioned gatehouse, her palms damp. She could see a sliver of the house through the gates, a majestic white structure with columns, surrounded by impossibly green lawn. It belonged in a magazine. The gulf between this world and her single room in Surulere felt infinite. Mr. Briggs returned. The salary is 120,000 naira a month. Accommodation is a room and bath in the staff quarters. You will be on a 1-month probation. You start on Monday. Bring your things. The numbers hit her like a physical blow. 120,000. It was more than double what she could ever hope to scrape together with her menial jobs. It was a ladder. It was a lifeline. She managed a nod, her throat tight. Thank you, sir. I will not disappoint you. See that you don't, he said, his expression not warming a single degree. Monday, 7 a.m. Walking back out onto the quiet, elegant street, the Lagos sun felt different. It felt like a spotlight. The flyer, now just a piece of damp paper in her clenched fist, had been a message in a bottle. And against all odds, she had been the one to find it. She wasn't just going to clean a house. She was going to step through a crack in the universe. She was going to breathe the air of a different life, if only for a few hours a day, and she was going to save every breath, every kobo, for the day she could bring her lions home. The hope was terrifying. It was fragile. But as she boarded the bus back to Surulere, for the first time in 4 years, the silence within her was not filled with echoes of loss, but with the faint, tremulous chorus of a new possibility. The threshold, the 3 days between Friday and Monday stretched before Adesawa like a lifetime, each hour thick with anticipation and dread. She moved through her Surulere world as a ghost, her physical self packing her meager belongings into a single, battered Gana-must-go bag, while her spirit was already pacing the silent, marbled halls of the house on Cooper Road. Her final visit to Ikorodu that Saturday was a bittersweet symphony of emotion. She held her boys longer, kissed them more fiercely, memorized the feel of their small hands in hers with a new, aching intensity. Mama has a new job, she told Aunt Ibanabo, her voice low with a mix of pride and anxiety. They sat in the shade of the rusting zinc awning, watching the boys chase a lethargic chicken. It is live-in, on Victoria Island. Aunt Ibanabo, her face a roadmap of kindness and hardship, nodded slowly. She understood the economics of hope better than anyone. That is good, NWAM, very good. A big opportunity. It means I might not be able to come every other weekend. The journey is far, and my free days may be few. The words tasted like ash. But the pay is good. Very good. I will send more for them. And I will save. Everything. Her aunt reached over, her gnarled fingers patting Adesawa's knee. You are doing what a mother must. They will know. When they are older, they will understand the sacrifice in your eyes. Go. Build the foundation. We are fine here. The boys, sensing a shift in the air, became clingy. Koma sat in her lap for an hour, not speaking, just tracing the lines on her palm. Komi brought her his favorite, most battered toy car to hold. Comb, the little leader, announced, when you go, Mama, I will be the man of the house for Auntie. His declaration shattered her and rebuilt her all at once. The goodbye on Sunday was the most difficult yet. It felt like she was stepping across a new, wider chasm. As the bus pulled away, their 3 small figures waving from beside Auntie Ibanabo's solid form grew smaller, not just in distance, but in the context of the new, intimidating world she was entering. She cried silently the whole way back to Lagos, her tears a prayer for strength and a plea for forgiveness. Monday dawned gray and drizzly, the sky weeping for her. She stood outside the imposing gates of the Cooper Road house at 6:45 a.m., her Gana-must-go bag at her feet, wearing her clean, crisp uniform, a simple navy dress and white apron Mr. Briggs had instructed her to buy. She felt like an imposter about to be exposed. Mr. Briggs let her in with a grunt, his manner no warmer than before. He led her not to the main house, but around the side to the staff quarters, a neat, separate wing with its own small courtyard. Her room was a revelation. It was simple, a single bed, a small wardrobe, a table, and a private bathroom with a functioning shower and toilet. To Adesawa, it was a palace. It was clean, quiet, and most importantly, hers. The window looked out onto a manicured hedge, not a teeming alley. The silence here was different from the silence in Surulere. It was peaceful, not aching. This is where you live, Mr. Briggs stated. You do not enter the main house through the front. You use the service entrance around back. Your first task is the ground floor. Every surface, every inch. I will inspect in 3 hours. The supplies are in the pantry off the kitchen. Do not touch anything that looks personal or valuable. Your job is to make it invisible that you were ever there, except for the cleanliness. Understood? Yes, sir, Adesawa said, her voice barely a whisper. He left her. She changed into soft-soled house shoes, stowed her bag in the wardrobe, and took a deep, steadying breath. This was it. The threshold. Entering the main house through the designated door, she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. The photographs on the recruitment flyer had not done it justice. The foyer soared 2 stories high, a central marble staircase curving gracefully upward. A chandelier, a monstrous, glittering sculpture of crystal, hung like frozen rain. The floors were polished cream marble veined with gold. Everything spoke of immense, quiet wealth, of a life so removed from her own it felt fictional. For a moment, she was paralyzed, a tiny figure in a vast, sterile museum. Then, the image of Combs' brave frown flashed in her mind. I will be the man of the house. She was here to build their house. This marble and crystal were just stone and glass. Her duty was to care for them. She found the pantry. It was stocked with an array of cleaning products she had only ever seen in television adverts. Imported sprays, soft microfiber cloths in every color, special brushes for delicate surfaces. She selected her tools with reverence. She started in the great living room. She dusted the legs of the grand piano, polished the surface of the mahogany coffee table until she could see her own determined reflection in it. She vacuumed the oversized Persian rug with a machine that whispered instead of roaring. She worked not with haste, but with a meditative focus. This was not a chore, it was a sacrament. Each stroke of the cloth, each sweep of the mop, was a brick laid in the foundation of her son's future. She poured every ounce of her loneliness, every drop of her love for her distant children, into her work. She made the windows so clear they seemed to disappear, inviting the gray morning light to flood the room without barrier. She moved to the study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that smelled of old knowledge. She dusted each spine carefully, imagining the owner, a faceless entity, reading here in quiet solitude. She aligned the blotter and pen on the vast, empty desk with geometric precision. The kitchen was a stainless steel and granite symphony. She degreased the spotless hob, polished the already shining fridge, and mopped the floor until it was a dark, reflective lake. When Mr. Briggs returned for his inspection, he carried a small flashlight. He said nothing. He ran a white-gloved finger along the top of a door frame in the living room. He shone the flashlight across the surface of the grand piano at a shallow angle, looking for dust. He examined the base of the kitchen sink where it met the counter. He checked the inside of the microwave. Odessa stood by the service door, her hands clasped, her heart a frantic drum. This was the moment. Would he send her back to Surrey? Would he declare her efforts insufficient? Finally, he turned off his flashlight and faced her. His expression was unreadable. Then, he gave a single, slow nod. Acceptable, he said. The word, though delivered without warmth, felt like a benediction. The owner returns in 3 weeks. Until then, you will maintain this standard. Daily, you will also be responsible for airing the bedrooms upstairs and ensuring the linens are fresh. You may take your meals from the kitchen, basic supplies only. Do not be extravagant. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. He left her alone again in the majestic, silent house. That evening, after a simple meal of bread and tea, Odessa sat on the bed in her new room. The peace was profound. She took out her phone and looked at the latest pictures Anda Bonabo had sent. The boys eating EBA, their faces smeared with soup. The familiar pang of separation hit her, but it was cushioned now by a new, solid feeling beneath it. She was in. She had crossed the threshold. The immaculate house around her was not her home, but it was her canvas, her workshop. Here, in this quiet, ordered space, she would work her alchemy. She would turn her diligence into naira, her silence into savings, her exile into their emancipation. As the unfamiliar sounds of night on Victoria Island, the distant hum of generators, the sigh of the ocean breeze through manicured trees, replaced the raucous symphony of Surrey. Odessa felt a fragile seedling of hope take root. It was a long road to Ikordu, but for the first time, she felt she had the right shoes for the journey. She had stepped into the unknown, and the unknown, for now, had found her acceptable. The artist's touch. The house on Cooper Road became Odessa's world, a vast and silent monastery where her devotion was cleanliness, and her prayer was the soft whisper of a microfiber cloth. In the 3 weeks before the owner's return, she didn't just clean. She learned the soul of the mansion. She discovered that the morning sun, from 9 to 10:15, would hit the crystal droplets of the grand chandelier in the foyer, casting tiny, dancing rainbows on the far wall if the windows were perfectly clear. She learned which floorboard on the upstairs landing creaked with a soft, mournful sigh, and she would step over it instinctively. She found that the antique mahogany desk in the study absorbed the faintest hint of lemon polish, not the stronger lavender scent, and would reward her with a deeper, richer glow. Mr. Briggs remained a distant, supervisory presence, appearing for his unannounced white glove inspections, his nods of acceptable growing slightly less grudging over time. He gave no praise, only an absence of criticism, which in his language was high commendation. Odessa's loneliness, a constant companion, began to metamorphose. In Surelier, it had been a hollow, hungry thing. Here, in the pristine emptiness, it became a kind of creative force. She wasn't just scrubbing and polishing, she was restoring. She was bringing a latent potential for beauty to the surface. The house was like a slumbering giant, and her careful work was a gentle, daily waking. She started to see the house not as a monument to wealth, but as a collection of materials that longed for care. The marble yearned to shine. The silk upholstery on the Louis XVI chairs in the formal lounge seemed to sigh with relief when she gently brushed its nap. The books in the study, though unread, seemed to settle more comfortably on their shelves after she dusted them, as if grateful for the attention. One rainy afternoon, assigned to air the master suite, she stood for a moment in the doorway, overwhelmed. It was a room the size of her entire Surelier block. A vast bed was draped in untouched ivory linen. The wall was a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the rain-lashed Atlantic, the gray sky, and churning sea merging into a single, powerful drama. The room felt less like a bedroom and more like the bridge of a ship commanding an ocean. Her task felt sacred. She moved with extra care, fluffing pillows that had never been slept on, running a cloth along teak furniture so smooth it felt like stone, ensuring not a single water spot marred the epic window. She was a curator in a museum of solitude. Her connection to her sons transformed within these walls. As she polished the long, empty dining table that could seat 20, she imagined her triplets sitting there one day, not in this house, but in a home of their own, eating a meal she had cooked. The rhythmic swish of the mop became a lullaby she once sang to them. The precise, circular motion of polishing silverware became a promise. For you. All for you. She began to leave subtle, invisible signatures of her care. A single, perfect yellow frangipani from the garden in a tiny bud vase on the kitchen windowsill, replaced daily. The books in the study arranged not just by height, but by the color of their spines, creating a soft gradient from burgundy to gold. The cushions on the sunroom sofa plumped in a specific, inviting order. These were not acts mandated by Mr. Briggs. They were offerings from her spirit to the spirit of the house. They were the exceptional quality the flyer had demanded, emerging not from fear, but from a deep, artistic need to create order and grace. The silence, once oppressive, became her colleague. In it, she could hear the house speak. The soft groan of its pipes at dawn. The gentle rattle of a specific window when the afternoon wind came from the east. She started to anticipate its needs. She noticed a slight film developing on the glass of a cabinet displaying Chinese porcelain before Mr. Briggs could, and rectified it. The day before the owner's scheduled return, Mr. Briggs conducted his final, pre-arrival inspection. He was more thorough than ever, his flashlight beam probing the most unlikely corners. He spent a long time in the master bathroom, examining the grout between the marble tiles. He checked the temperature of the two refrigerators. Finally, he toured the entire ground floor one last time. He stopped in the center of the living room, where the rainbows from the chandelier were just beginning their daily dance. He looked at the perfectly aligned magazines, the faultless glass, the air that smelled of nothing but faint, clean ozone. He turned to Odessa, who stood waiting, her heart suspended. He didn't nod. Instead, he said something he had never said before. "It will do." It was, from him, a thunderous accolade. A warmth spread through Odessa's chest. She had not just passed a test, she had defined its parameters. That night, in her small room, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She looked at the photos of her boys. "Do you see?" she whispered, her finger touching Combs' determined face. "Mama is building. She is learning how to make things beautiful and keep them safe. This is for us. She realized something profound. In caring for this empty, magnificent house, she was, in a way, caring for the dream of her own future home. She was practicing. She was honing the skills of guardianship, of creating and maintaining a haven. The mansion on Cooper Road was her training ground. The loneliness had been alchemized, through sheer will and love, into artistry. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was the keeper of the stillness, the revealer of hidden light, the unseen artist whose medium was order and whose masterpiece was a home waiting, perfectly, for its owner to finally live in it. The return. The air in the house on Cooper Road changed. It was a subtle shift, felt in the bones of the place before it was seen or heard. A new tension vibrated in the polished silence, a sense of imminent arrival. Mr. Briggs, usually a statue of stoic control, became a man of meticulous, nervous energy. He barked orders into his walkie-talkie, checked and rechecked the generator fuel levels, and had the gardeners trim hedges that were already geometrically perfect. Adesua felt it too. Her artistic communion with the empty house was about to be interrupted by its rightful owner. The thought filled her with a strange duality of dread and a sliver of defiant pride. This man would walk into her masterpiece. Would he see it? Would he feel the care she had woven into the very air? The day arrived, heavy with a humid heat that promised rain. Adesua had been instructed to make herself scarce, but remain on standby. The owner, Alhaji Abdulaziz Danjuma, was arriving in the late afternoon. From the small window of her quarters, she watched the flurry of activity. An army of security men materialized, speaking in low tones into their sleeves. A fleet of sleek, black SUVs glided through the now open gates and disappeared around the back of the house. Then, silence descended again, deeper than before. The wait was agonizing. She busied herself with organizing the cleaning supply pantry, her ears straining for any sound from the main house. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the sharp buzz of the intercom in her room made her jump. It was Mr. Briggs's voice, stripped of its usual gravel, oddly formal. Adesua, to the main foyer. Now, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Judgment. She smoothed her crisp apron, patted her neatly tied headscarf, and took the familiar path through the service entrance, her soft-soled shoes silent on the marble. The grandeur of the foyer felt different with a presence in it. Standing near the foot of the curving staircase was a man. He was not as tall as she had imagined, but he carried himself with an unmistakable authority that seemed to fill the vast space. He was dressed in a simple but exquisite kaftan of cream linen. He had a closely trimmed beard, more salt than pepper, and eyes that were calmly surveying his surroundings. This was Alhaji Abdulaziz Danjuma. Mr. Briggs stood a respectful few paces away, his hands clasped behind his back, a model of attentive rigidity. Adesua stopped at the edge of the foyer, her hands folded, her gaze lowered to a spot on the floor a few feet in front of the owner. She could feel his eyes sweep over her, and then continue their appraisal of the house. The silence stretched. It was not the empty silence she knew, but a charged, listening silence. Then, Alhaji Danjuma spoke. His voice was lower than she expected, a calm, resonant bass that seemed to come from the marble itself. Briggs. Sir. The house, it feels different. He took a slow step forward, his leather slippers whispering on the stone. He looked up at the chandelier, a prism of captured afternoon light. He glanced into the living room, his gaze traveling over the piano, the perfect cushions, the spotless glass. He turned and walked towards his study, pausing at the doorway. Adesua held her breath. Was something wrong? Had she missed a spot? He entered the study. From her position, she could see him run a hand, almost reverently, over the surface of the mahogany desk. He looked at the bookshelf, his eyes catching on the soft gradient of colors she had created. He turned and looked back into the hall, his eyes finding the small, fresh frangipani on the kitchen windowsill, a splash of sun yellow in the gray light. He returned to the foyer, his steps measured. He stopped before Mr. Briggs, but his attention seemed to encompass the entire, gleaming domain. The contractors, the maintenance team you used while I was away, Alhaji Danjuma began. Mr. Briggs shifted almost imperceptibly. Sir, who is responsible for this? Alhaji asked, his hand making a slight, graceful gesture that took in the air, the light, the profound sense of serene readiness. This is not just clean. This is alive. It feels as if the house has been waiting for me, happily. Not like a museum, but like a home. The relief that flooded Mr. Briggs was visible in the slight drop of his shoulders. It is the new housekeeper, sir. Adesawa. He turned slightly, indicating her where she stood frozen. Alhaji Danjuma's gaze shifted to her. For the first time, his eyes fully met hers. They were intelligent, assessing, but not unkind. He looked at her not as a piece of furniture, but as the source of a phenomenon. Adesawa managed a small, stiff bow of her head. Sir. He took a step closer. Adesawa, you have done this? All of it. Yes, sir, she whispered, then found her voice. It is my duty, sir. He shook his head slowly, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. No, duty keeps dust away. This, he gestured again, seemingly searching for the word. This is artistry. You have not cleaned my house. You have honored it. The words were so unexpected, so profound in their understanding, that Adesawa's eyes stung. She blinked rapidly, looking down again. No one had ever seen her work, her true work, in such a way. To him, her invisible signatures were not invisible. He had seen the frangipani. He had noticed the books. He turned back to Mr. Briggs, his tone decisive. She is to be retained. Her salary is to be reviewed upward, significantly, and ensure she has everything she requires. Do not disturb her methods. His final sentence was a quiet command that brooked no argument. He had seen the artistry and would not have the artist micromanaged. Yes, sir. Immediately, sir, Mr. Briggs said, the deference in his voice absolute. Alhaji Danjuma gave one more appraising look around his luminous foyer, a look of deep satisfaction settling on his features. He nodded, first to his manager, then, meaningfully, to Adesawa. Thank you, he said, the words simple and direct. Then he turned and walked up the sweeping staircase, leaving the scent of fine sandalwood and quiet authority in his wake. Mr. Briggs waited until the sound of the bedroom door closing upstairs echoed softly before he let out a long, slow breath. He looked at Adesawa, his expression utterly transformed. The sternness was still there, but it was now layered with a newfound, wary respect. You heard Alhaji, he said, his voice hushed. Carry on. Back in the sanctuary of her quarters, Adesawa closed the door and leaned against it, her legs weak. The encounter replayed in her mind. Artistry. You have honored it. The praise was a balm on the raw, lonely parts of her soul. It was validation not just of her work, but of her very essence. Her need to create beauty from order, to pour care into emptiness. She looked at the photos of her sons, her vision blurring. He saw it. She whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a warm path down her cheek. This was more than a job security. It was an acknowledgement that her quiet offering, her prayer of polish and care, had been received. The foundation she was building was no longer just made of saved naira. It was now also built on the solid rock of recognized worth. For the first time in 4 years, she felt not just like a survivor, but like a person of substance, seen and valued in a world that usually looked right through her. The owner had returned, and in doing so, he had returned a piece of her own dignity to her. The crest of the wave. The days following Alhaji Danjuma's return settled into a new rhythm, one humming with a quiet undercurrent of validation. The house was no longer a slumbering giant, but a living entity. Its pulse the soft sounds of the owner moving within it, the distant murmur of a conference call from the study, the rustle of a newspaper in the sunroom, the faint, rhythmic squeak of his leather chair. Adesawa adapted her artistry to this new reality. She became a ghost of efficiency, a master of timing. She learned that Alhaji Danjuma took his morning coffee on the east veranda from 7:30 to 8 o'clock. She would have the veranda spotless by 7:15, the glass tables gleaming, the cushions plumped, and would retreat before he arrived. She discovered he favored the library in the evenings. She would clean it meticulously during her late afternoon rounds, ensuring the reading lamp was dusted, the Afghan blanket neatly folded on the arm of his favorite wingback chair, and a fresh carafe of water on the side table. He acknowledged her work not with words, but with a peaceful silence that spoke of contentment. Sometimes, she would find a small, tangible sign. A book left slightly off-center on a table she had just straightened, a cushion bearing the slight impression of having been used. These were her rewards. Proof that her pristine environment was being lived in, enjoyed. It was the completion of her circle of care. Mr. Briggs, under the owner's directive, became a different man in his dealings with her. The harshness was replaced by a stiff formality that held a kernel of respect. He informed her of her new salary with a curt nod. The number was so far beyond her hopes that she had to ask him to repeat it. 180,000 naira a month. The figure echoed in her mind, a sweet, dizzying chant. 180, 180. This was the crest of the wave. This was the tangible, glorious fruit of her sacrifice and her skill. For the first time since she'd held her newborn sons, Adesawa felt the fierce, warm glow of provision. Not just scraping by, but actively building. On her first free Saturday under the new regime, a wild, giddy energy possessed her. She withdrew a generous portion of her first increased salary, the crisp bills feeling like leaves of possibility in her hands. She went to the Lekki market, not as a window shopper, but as a conqueror. She bought 3 sets of matching outfits for the boys, little button-down shirts and shorts in vibrant blues and greens. She found the sturdy, quality sneakers she'd always pointed out to Aunt Ibanabo, but could never afford. She bought a new, larger pot for her aunt, a bolt of rich blue Ankara cloth, and a tin of expensive tea biscuits. Then, for the sheer joy of it, she went to a toy stall and selected 3 different, brightly colored toy cars, one for each of her lions. The journey to Ikorodu felt like a pilgrimage of joy. The usual weight of the parting to come was still there, but it was overshadowed by the present triumph. When the bus pulled up to the familiar dusty street, she saw them waiting. Aunt Ibanabo had dressed them in their best, which now looked shabby against the vision of what was in her bags. Their eyes went wide. "Mama!" The chorus was the sweetest sound. They swarmed her, and she laughed, a sound that was becoming less foreign to her own ears. She let them pull her into the compound, her bags clutched tightly. Inside, she became Santa Claus, Mother Christmas, and the bearer of all good things rolled into one. The boys ripped into the packages with shouts of delight. Combe immediately began racing his new car along the floor. Combe carefully examined the mechanics of his brow furrowed in concentration. Combe clutched his to his chest, beaming. "Adesawa." Aunt Ibanabo admonished gently, eyeing the bounty. "This is too much." "It is not enough," Adesawa replied, her voice thick with emotion. She pressed the money for their upkeep into her aunt's hand, a sum that made the older woman's eyes widen. "It is from the new job. The owner, he is pleased. He valued my work." The pride in her own statement was a new sensation. She wasn't just handing over survival money. She was sharing the spoils of success. That afternoon was pure, unadulterated bliss. She watched her sons parade in their new clothes, their little chests puffed out. She helped Aunt Ibanabo cook a lavish pot of oaf insala with more chicken than they usually saw in a month. As they ate, the boys chattered about their days, their words tumbling over each other, and Adesawa listened, her heart so full it ached. She told them about the big, quiet house, about the shiny floors and the giant window that looked at the sea. She didn't call it work. She called it her big house. Combe declared he would live in a big house too when he grew up. Combe asked if the sea had fish. Combe just offered her a piece of his chicken, his eyes full of love. As the golden hour of late afternoon washed over the compound, Adesawa sat on a low stool with Combe in her lap, Combe leaning against her shoulder, and Combe playing at her feet. She breathed in the scent of them, sweat, biscuits, and childhood, mixed with the wood smoke from next door. This, right here, was the point of it all. This connection, this security, this ability to give them not just life, but joy. For a few precious hours, the chasm between Victoria Island and Ikorodu didn't just narrow, it vanished. She was not the weekend visitor or the faraway provider. She was simply Mama, surrounded by her lion cubs, with the sun on her face and the solid, thrilling knowledge that the wave she was riding was finally carrying them all toward a safer shore. The crest was sweet, and for now, she let herself balance there, high above the depths of past struggles, believing with every fiber of her being that she could stay on top. The shattering call. The wave held for 6 perfect days. Adesawa moved through the grand house on Cooper Road with a lightness in her step that had never been there before. The memory of her sons' faces lit up with joy, the feel of Combe's chicken-greasy fingers patting her cheek, the weight of Combe's thoughtful head on her shoulder. These were talismans she carried in her heart. She polished silver with a smile, seeing her own reflection, no longer just weary, but hopeful. Even the vast, silent rooms seemed to hold a warmer, more benevolent energy. Alhaji Danjuma had left for a brief business trip to Abuja, and the house had returned to its quiet, expectant state. Adesawa was in the sunroom, carefully wiping down the leaves of a large fiddle-leaf fig tree, her mind composing the next weekend's visit in her head. Perhaps she could take them to the beach at Elagushi? The new salary could stretch to a taxi. They would feel the sand, see the Atlantic that she saw from the master bedroom window every day. The idea sparked a little fire of excitement in her chest. It was in this bubble of burgeoning plans that her phone, tucked in her apron pocket, began to vibrate. Not the cheerful chirp of a message from Aunt Ibanabo with a new photo, but the long, insistent buzz of a call. She pulled it out, saw the name Neighbor Grace, Ikoridu, flashing on the screen. A faint prickle of unease brushed her neck. Auntie Ibanabo's neighbors never called. They passed the phone to her aunt. "Hello." Adesawa answered, keeping her voice low. There was a burst of static, then a voice, high-pitched and frayed with a tension that was instantly, catastrophically wrong. "Adesawa? Adesawa, is that you?" It was Mama Chinidu, who sold Akara next door. "Yes, Mama Chinidu. Good afternoon. Is everything?" "It's Auntie Ibanabo." The voice cut her off, tumbling out in a frantic rush. She was at her spot, selling plantains. She just slumped. "Otiiku. Adesawa, she is gone. They have taken her to the morgue." "Yezu, what will we do?" The words did not make sense. They were not in a language of the real world. Slumped. Otiiku. Morgue. They were jagged, foreign objects thrown into the serene space of the sunroom. The microfiber cloth slipped from Adesawa's fingers and landed soundlessly on the polished terrazzo floor. "No," she whispered, the word a dry leaf in her mouth. "No, that's not. You must be mistaken. Let me speak to her." "There is no one to speak to," Mama Chinidu wailed, the sound crackling down the line. "She is gone. The children, the boys are here with me. They are crying. They saw it. They saw her fall. The boys saw it." Those 4 words were the scalpel that finally sliced through the veil of shock. A horrific, crystal-clear image erupted in Adesawa's mind. Her 3 little boys, their new sneakers dusty, standing helplessly over the familiar, robust form of their great-aunt, crumpled on the ground amidst scattered, roasting plantains. Their world, their constant, their rock, vanishing before their eyes. A sound escaped her, a choked, animal gasp that had no place in the pristine sunroom. Her legs buckled. She grabbed the edge of a side table, her knuckles bleaching white, the phone still pressed to her ear. The world tilted on its axis. The careful order, the polished surfaces, the hopeful plans, all of it dissolved into a howling void. "Mama Chinidu, the boys." She managed to rasp. "They are with me. But for how long? You must come. You must come now, Baiko." The line went dead. Adesawa stood frozen, the silence of the grand house now a monstrous, mocking thing. The gentle hum of the air conditioner was a roar. The dappled sunlight through the window felt cold and alien. Auntie Ibanabo. Gone. The pillar of her life, the woman who had held her family together, the only reason she could dare to build this future, was gone. The guilt that followed this realization was instant and annihilating. She had left her. She had left her with the immense responsibility of 3 active boys while she polished marble and arranged flowers in a billionaire's house. She had been riding the crest of her wave while her aunt, her rock, had been slowly wearing down. And the boys, her lions, they were alone in a way they had never been. They were witnesses to death, their small hearts shattered, and she was here, 30 kilometers away, holding a dust cloth. A violent tremor took hold of her body. The grief was a physical tsunami, crashing over her, pulling her under. She slid down the side of the table, crumpling onto the floor she had made spotless. She drew her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around herself, and began to rock. No tears came at first, only dry, heaving sobs that racked her frame silently. The polished terrazzo beneath her cheek was unforgivably cold. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed in this suspended state of shock. Then, a deeper, fiercer instinct surged through the numbness. Her children. She pushed herself up, her body moving on autopilot. She found Mr. Briggs in the gatehouse, explaining in a voice that didn't sound like her own that there had been a death in the family, an emergency in Ikoridu. She needed to go. Now, her face must have been a mask of true devastation, for even Mr. Briggs, for once, did not question or frown. He merely nodded, a flicker of something akin to concern in his eyes. "Take the time you need," he said, the phrase so alien from him it barely registered. The journey to Ikorodu was a blur of anguished noise trapped behind her teeth. The bustling streets, the bleating horns, the hawkers' cries, all of it was muted, seen through a thick, warped glass of pain. Her mind was a single, screaming prayer. Let them be okay. Let me get to them. Hold on, my babies. Mama is coming. When she finally stumbled into Mama Chinidu's cramped sitting room, the world narrowed to a single point. There they were, her three boys, huddled together on a low bench, still in the clothes she had bought them just days ago, now smudged with dust and tears. They looked small, impossibly small and broken. Their bright eyes, usually so full of mischief and curiosity, were hollow pools of confusion and terror. They saw her. A collective shudder went through them. Then, a wail rose from Combe, raw and ragged. It broke the dam. Kome and Komi launched themselves toward her, their cries erupting. She fell to her knees and gathered them in, all three of them, a tangle of limbs and tears and snot and despair. She buried her face in their hair, inhaling the scent of fear and loss that had replaced their childhood sweetness. "Mama is here," she choked out, over and over, a mantra against the horror. "Mama is here. I have you. I have you now." But as she held them, feeling their small bodies tremble against hers, the second, more terrifying wave of reality crashed down. Auntie Ibanabo was gone. The anchor was gone. She had her children back in her arms, but the world that had allowed her to hold them at a safe distance had just evaporated. The crest of the wave was gone. She was plunged into the deepest, darkest trough, clinging to her sons, with nothing beneath her feet but the raging, uncaring sea. The reunion of lions. The world had shrunk to the four walls of Mama Chinidu's parlor, a space thick with the smell of grief, cheap incense, and the stark, unvarnished reality of death. The kind neighbors, their faces etched with pity, moved like shadows, bringing plates of uneaten food and speaking in hushed tones that scraped against Adesawa's raw nerves. The boys, her lions, were no longer cubs in that moment. They were tiny, traumatized survivors, clinging to her as if she were a life raft in a shipwreck they had just witnessed. Arrangements were a grim, necessary blur. Adesawa moved through them powered by a cold, mechanical resolve that had taken over where her shattered emotions left off. She identified her aunt's body at the morgue, a sight that carved another permanent scar on her soul, the vibrant, sturdy woman now still and waxy on a cold slab. She used a portion of her newfound salary, money meant for joy, to secure a prompt and decent burial in the local cemetery. The funeral was a small, agonizing affair under a relentless sun. Adesawa stood between her sons, a hand on each small shoulder, holding Kome against her legs, as the plain casket was lowered into the red earth. The finality of the thud of soil onward seemed to echo in the hollowed-out cavern of her chest. After the last mourner had left, after the neighbors had gone back to their own lives, a profound and terrifying silence descended upon the compound that was no longer Auntie Ibanabo's, but just a house. The boys were listless, their playthings abandoned. They followed Adesawa from room to room, silent shadows, jumping at sudden sounds. At night, they piled into her old childhood bed with her, a tangle of limbs, their sleep fractured by whimpers and nightmares where they called out, "For Big Mummy." For 3 days, they existed in this suspended state of shock. Adesawa cooked, she cleaned, she held them, but her mind was a frantic, scurrying thing in a trap. The foundation had not just cracked, it had been vaporized. She had no job to return to in Ikorodu. Her single room in Surulere was a coffin for 4 souls. And the job on Cooper Road, the pristine, demanding world of marble and order, it felt like a distant, cruel fantasy. On the 4th morning, as she watched Combe listlessly push a toy car back and forth without any sound effects, a fierce, primordial instinct ignited within her. It burned away the fog of despair. This was her child. They were all her children. They were injured, frightened, and their world had ended. She was their only world now. She could not leave them. Not again. Not for a single hour. The decision, once made, was absolute. She would take them to Lagos. With her. But to where? The single room was impossible. The boys' quarters on Cooper Road? The iron rule echoed in her memory. No personal visitors. Ever. Mr. Briggs's stern face swam before her. Taking them there was unthinkable. It was a guarantee of dismissal, the final collapse of everything. Yet, the alternative, leaving them here with a paid stranger, or trying to find some dubious daycare in Suralire she couldn't afford, was even more unthinkable. Auntie Ibanabo's death had rewritten every contract. Safety was no longer a calculated risk. It was her children, physically with her, within her sight. "We are going to Mama's house," she announced that afternoon, her voice firmer than she felt. 3 pairs of identical, weary eyes looked up at her. There was no excitement, only a wary confusion. All of us, together. She spent the day packing. Not just the new clothes and toys, but the essence of their life here. Auntie Ibanabo's well-worn Bible, the boys' favorite cracked plastic plates, the faded photographs stuck to the wall. She packed their small lives into 2 bags, folding their grief and their memories between the layers of clothing. The journey back to Lagos was a silent, somber caravan. The boys, usually a riot of questions and noise on the bus, sat pressed against her, staring out at the passing landscape as if it were a foreign country. Koma held the toy car he'd had when his big mummy fell. Comey sucked his thumb, a habit he'd long outgrown. Combe just held her hand, his grip almost painful. When she unlocked the door to her single room in Suralire, the reality of her decision hit her with the force of the stifling, trapped heat that rolled out. The room, which had always felt like a lonely cell, now seemed laughably, tragically minute. 10 by 12 feet for 1 grieving woman and 3 growing, energetic boys. The mattress took up half the floor. There was no space to play, to breathe, to escape from each other's sorrow. The boys stood just inside the doorway, overwhelmed by the tiny, hot space. This was not the mama's house of their weekend imaginings. This was a box. Adesawa saw it through their eyes, and her heart broke anew. But she plastered on a smile, a fragile, trembling thing. "Welcome home, my lions," she said, her voice catching. "Our own house." That first night was a lesson in controlled chaos. They ate bread and sardines squeezed together on the mattress. Bathing was a logistical ordeal involving the plastic bucket and much shuffling. When they finally settled to sleep, the room was a furnace of bodies and shared breath. Adesawa lay awake, listening to their uneven breathing, feeling the press of their small, warm forms. The love was an ache, a physical weight of responsibility and fear. She had them back. The separation was over. The reunion she had prayed for 4 years had arrived in the worst possible way, dressed in the black robes of loss. Her lions were with her, but they were wounded, and their den was a cramped, airless closet. She held them close in the dark, their heartbeats a frantic, syncopated rhythm against her own. The relief of having them near was inseparable from the terror of what came next. The wave was gone, and she was sinking, but now, she was sinking with all her precious cargo clutched tightly to her chest. They were together. It would have to be enough. For now, it was all there was. Sunday was a day of slow, suffocating adjustment. The single room in Suralire, once a sanctuary of silent solitude, became a pressure cooker of grief and confinement. The triplets, used to the dusty but open compound in Ikorodu, bumped against each other and the walls with a restless energy that was part trauma, part pure 4-year-old spirit. Their questions, when they came, were like small, sharp knives. "Will Big Mummy wake up under the ground?" Comey asked, his thumb creeping back toward his mouth. "Why did God take her?" Koma pondered, his brow furrowed in an expression far too old for his face. Combe, the practical one, just asked, "Mama, is this our house forever?" Adesawa answered each as best she could, her voice a fragile vessel, trying to hold oceans of sorrow and uncertainty. She tried to create routine, a mealtime, a washing time, a story time, but the walls closed in on them all. By evening, a frantic anxiety had begun to coil in Adesawa's stomach. Tomorrow was Monday. The reality of her job on Cooper Road loomed, a stark, glittering palace in direct opposition to the hot, cramped reality of her life. Mr. Briggs's rule was absolute. No personal visitors. Ever. Alhaji Danjuma's quiet respect was for her professionalism, her artistry, and solitude. Bringing 3 children into that equation was not just a breach of protocol. It was the demolition of the entire carefully constructed persona of the exceptional, discreet housekeeper. But what was the alternative? She had no one to call. No trusted neighbor here. No money for a day nurse. Leaving them alone in this room was unconscionable. The memory of Auntie Ibanabo's sudden collapse was a fresh, terrifying wound. Anything could happen. The thought of a fire, a stranger at the door, one of them choking while she was across town cleaning marble, it was not fear. It was a visceral, paralyzing horror. As dusk painted the single window a deep purple, a desperate, foolish plan began to form in the cracks of her panic. It was born of sleeplessness and a love that bordered on madness. The house on Cooper Road was vast, enormously vast. It had rooms within rooms, alcoves, a sunroom that was rarely used, a breakfast nook in the servants' wing far from the main traffic. Alhaji Danjuma kept to his study or his bedroom in the mornings. Mr. Briggs was often sequestered in his gatehouse office. If she could get them there, unseen. The plan was riddled with holes, a ship made of tissue paper. But the alternative, losing her job, their only real income, was an abyss she could not peer into. This job was the ladder out of this very room. She had to protect it. She had to protect them. The two needs twisted together into a single, desperate imperative. "My lions," she said, gathering them on the mattress. Their faces, lit by the weak glow of a single bulb, were solemn. "Tomorrow, Mama has to go to work. To the big house." Their faces fell instantly, shadows of the old Sunday evening dread returning. "But," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you will come with me." 3 pairs of eyes widened. A flicker of interest, the first since the tragedy, sparked within them. "It is a secret mission," she said, forcing a playful tone that felt like a lie on her tongue. "A spy mission. The big house has many secret corners. I will take you to one. But you must be as quiet as little mice. No, quieter than mice. As quiet as shadows. Can you be shadows for Mama?" They nodded, their heads bobbing with grave seriousness. The concept appealed to Combs' leadership, Combs' love of rules, and Comey's desire to please. "You will have your toys. You will have water and biscuits. But you must not move from your spot. You must not make a sound. Not a peep. If anyone finds you, the mission fails. And Mama could lose her job. Do you understand? We will be shadows, Mama," Combe promised, his little chest puffing out with the weight of the responsibility. That night, as the boys finally slept fitfully around her, Adessawa stared at the peeling ceiling. Guilt, cold and slick, coated her insides. She was risking everything. She was asking her children, fresh from witnessing death, to now participate in a deception that filled her with shame. She was gambling their newfound stability on the impossible behavior of 3 preschoolers and the sheer, blind luck of not being discovered. But the image of leaving them in this hot, unsafe room was worse. The image of being jobless, unable to feed them, was a specter that drowned the guilt in a tide of primal survival instinct. Before dawn, she dressed them in their darkest, most nondescript clothes. She packed a small bag with sippy cups, dry crackers, their 3 toy cars, and a thin blanket. Her own heart hammered against her ribs as if trying to escape the folly she was committing. The journey across Lagos was an ordeal of nerve-wracking proportions. Keeping 3 boys quiet and inconspicuous on a crowded, noisy bus was its own challenge. Every laugh from another passenger made her jump. Every time one of her sons pointed at something, she gently but firmly pulled their hand down, putting a finger to her lips. "Shadows," she would remind them in a whisper, and they would mimic her gesture, their eyes huge. When they finally approached the imposing gates of Cooper Road, Adessawa's mouth went dry. She ushered them quickly past the gatehouse window, hoping Mr. Briggs was occupied inside. She used her key on the service entrance, her hands trembling so badly she could barely fit it in the lock. Once inside the cool, silent dimness of the servants' corridor, she allowed herself one shaky breath. So far, so good. She led them, their little hands gripping hers, through the labyrinthine back passages of the house to a small, sun-drenched breakfast nook. It was tucked away at the far end of the wing, furnished with a built-in bench and a small table, and almost entirely obscured from view by 2 large, luxuriant potted palms. "This is your secret base," she whispered, kneeling before them. She spread the blanket in the corner of the bench, arranged their toys, gave them their cups and crackers. "You must not come looking for me. I will come back to check on you. You are my brave, quiet shadows." They nodded, already fascinated by the new, lush environment, their small hands running over the smooth leaves of the plants. For a moment, seeing them there, relatively content and hidden, the desperate plan seemed like it could work. A sliver of insane hope pierced her dread. She kissed each forehead, her lips lingering, communicating a love and an apology she could not voice. "Remember," she breathed, her final instruction. Not a sound. She walked away, each step feeling like a betrayal, each step taking her further from them and deeper into the lie. She reported to Mr. Briggs in the gatehouse, her face a carefully composed mask of normalcy. "Good morning, sir." He gave her a curt nod, his attention on a clipboard. "Main floor today? Alhaji has an online meeting in the study at 10. Ensure it is impeccable." "Yes, sir." As she collected her supplies and began her work, polishing the already spotless surfaces, her ears were no longer tuned to the house's sighs and creaks. They were laser-focused, straining for any sound from the distant nook, a sound that would shatter her world. Every tick of the grand clock in the hall was a countdown to potential disaster. She was no longer an artist. She was a tightrope walker over a fatal drop, and her balance depended on the silent obedience of 3 4-year-old boys hiding in the leaves. The discovery. For 2 agonizing hours, Adesawa existed in a state of hyper-alert suspension. Her body performed the familiar rituals of care, dusting the intricate fretwork of the display cabinets, polishing the silver picture frames that held photos of Alhaji Danjuma with foreign dignitaries. But her spirit was tethered to the sun-drenched nook at the far end of the house. Every fiber of her being was a listening device, tuned to a frequency of disaster. So far, the silence held. It was a fragile, miraculous thing. She pictured them there, her 3 shadows, perhaps whispering to each other in the way children do when they think they're being secret, their small hands guiding toy cars along the seams of the bench cushion. The image was both a solace and a source of crippling anxiety. She had just finished the study, aligning the pens on the blotter with surgical precision, when she heard it. Not a cry, not a shout, but the distinct, rising tone of a childish disagreement. It was muffled by distance and walls, but in the cathedral-like silence of the main house, it was as jarring as a shattering vase. Her blood turned to ice. "No, not now. Please." It was Combs' voice, a little too loud, tinged with 4-year-old injustice. "You're not following the rules. The red car has to go here." A lower, stubborn mumble from Coma. Then, clear as a bell, Combs' voice rising in triumphant declaration. "It's mine. I'm the leader of the mission. It's mine." The words, ordinary and possessive, echoed down the polished corridors like a death knell. Adesawa dropped her duster. It fluttered silently to the Persian rug. She stood frozen, her heart a frantic, trapped bird in her chest. She heard the heavy, unmistakable tread of leather shoes on marble. Not the soft-soled shuffle of her own house shoes, but the authoritative click of Mr. Briggs's brogues. He was on patrol, and he had heard. She could do nothing but listen, paralyzed, as the footsteps, steady and purposeful, moved away from the central hall and toward the servants' wing, toward the nook. Each step was a hammer blow on the coffin of her hope. She imagined his stern face, his eyes narrowing as he followed the sound, parting the fronds of the potted palms like a hunter pushing through jungle foliage. The silence that followed the cessation of the boys' squabble was infinitely worse. It was the silence of discovery. It stretched, thin and terrible, for a full minute. Then, Mr. Briggs's voice, not a yell, but a low, thunderous roll that carried all the way to where she stood trembling in the study. "What is the meaning of this?" There was no childish reply, only a terrified, collective hush. "Who are you? Who is your mother?" Adesawa closed her eyes, waiting for the axe to fall. She didn't have to wait long. She heard the small, scared, but truthful voice of her firstborn, Combe, the leader even in defeat. Mama Adesawa. The sound of her name, spoken by her son in that context, was a condemnation. She heard Mr. Briggs's sharp, disgusted intake of breath. Then, the ominous sound of his footsteps returning, this time accompanied by the soft, reluctant scuff of 3 pairs of small sandals. She forced her legs to move, stepping out of the study into the grand foyer just as they entered from the opposite corridor. The scene was a grotesque parody. Mr. Briggs, his face a mask of fury and betrayal, marched like an angry general. Behind him, in a forlorn little line, came her sons. They looked impossibly small against the soaring marble backdrop. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with a fear she had sworn to never let them feel again. Combe held his red car in a death grip. Combe looked down at his shoes. Comey's lower lip trembled, tears welling but not yet falling. Mr. Briggs's eyes found her, and the fury in them was white hot. He stopped, the children bumping to a halt behind him. For a long moment, he just stared at her, as if seeing a stranger, a vandal who had defiled a sacred temple. You, he finally spat, the single word dripping with contempt. He gestured violently behind him at the boys. You dare? You bring your brood into Al-Haji's house. You turn his home into a creche. Sir, I can explain, she began, her voice a thin, broken thread. Explain? He cut her off, his voice rising, echoing in the vast space. He took a step closer, his own fear of the owner making him vicious. Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you think this is a joke? This is a private residence, a billionaire's home. He trusted me to manage it, and I bring in a woman who hides children in the corners. He was shouting now, his anger feeding on his panic. He could be here any minute. He could walk in and see this circus. What do you think he would do? He would fire me on the spot. Do you want to get me sacked? Is that it? Each question was a lash. The boys flinched. Comey began to cry in earnest, silent tears carving paths through the dust on his cheeks. I had no choice, Adesawa pleaded, tears now streaming down her own face, a mirror of her son's. My aunt, their caretaker, she died. I don't care. Mr. Briggs roared, silencing her. Your personal problems are not for this house. Your duty was to this house. A duty you have betrayed utterly. He pointed a shaking finger towards the service entrance. Get them out. Get your things from your quarters. Get out of this compound. You are finished. Sacked. Do you understand? Never show your face here again. The finality of it was a physical blow. The world she had built, the future she was securing, evaporated in the heat of his rage. She looked past him at her children, their little faces crumpling in confusion and terror. They had only wanted to be with their mama, and she had led them to this humiliation, this cataclysmic loss. With a strength born of sheer devastation, she walked forward, past Mr. Briggs, and gathered her sons to her. She didn't look at the manager again. Holding Comey on her hip, clutching Combe and Come's hands, she turned and walked, back straight, toward the servants' wing to pack the shattered remains of their life. The grand, beautiful house, which she had loved and honored with every fiber of her being, had become a courtroom, and she had been found guilty. The sentence was banishment. And as she walked, the only sound in the majestic foyer was the soft, heartbreaking sound of a mother and her children weeping. The dismissal, the walk from the grand foyer to the staff quarters was the longest and shortest journey of Adesawa's life. Short in measured steps, but long in the annihilation of a future. Her son's small hands were damp with sweat and tears in hers, their sniffles and Comey's muffled sobs the only sounds in the sterile back corridors. The beautiful, silent passages she had navigated with such pride now felt like the gullet of a beast that had rejected her. Mr. Briggs did not follow them into the quarters. His dismissal, delivered in the throne room of the house, was final. He was likely already calculating how to explain her absence to Al-Haji Danjuma, crafting a story that painted her as unreliable, deceitful, a contaminant in the perfect order. Inside the small, neat room that had been her haven, the reality crashed down. The boys huddled on the bed, watching her with huge, wounded eyes as she moved in a jerky, mechanical daze. She pulled the Ghana must-go bag from the wardrobe, the same one she had arrived with just weeks ago, feeling the cruel circularity of it all. Every item she packed was a relic of a dead dream. The crisp aprons, now symbols of a professionalism she had supposedly violated. The soft-soled house shoes that had tread so carefully on the marble. The small Bible she read at night. She bundled them in, her movements numb. Mama, Combe whispered, his voice raw. Are we going back to the small room? His question, so practical, shattered the last of her composure. A sob ripped from her throat, and she leaned against the wardrobe, her shoulders shaking. How could she explain? How could she tell them that the small room was now a prison with no key, that the path she had carved for them had just collapsed into a pit? She turned and knelt before them, pulling all three into a tight embrace. I am so sorry, my lions, she choked into their hair. Mama made a bad choice. A very bad choice. Now we have to go. But the big house, Comes said, his logical mind struggling. You made it shiny. The man was happy. Not anymore. Adesawa said, the words ash in her mouth. Not anymore. She finished packing, the bag now bulging with the pathetic totality of her life. She ushered the boys out of the room, taking one last look at the simple bed, the clean bathroom. A place of peace, now a crime scene. She closed the door softly, as if not to wake the ghost of the hopeful woman who had once slept there. The walk back through the service entrance and across the side courtyard toward the main gate was a perp walk. She felt exposed, every window of the great house a judging eye. The boys, sensing the gravity, were silent now, too scared even to cry. Combe held the hem of her skirt. Comet clutched the strap of her bag, and Comey, back on her hip, buried his face in her neck. Mr. Briggs stood at the open gatehouse door, arms crossed, a sentinel of finality. He watched them approach, his expression not one of anger now, but of cold, efficient closure. He held out a white envelope. Your severance for the month, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. Do not come back. Do not call. Consider your employment here, and any reference from here, null and void. Adesawa stopped, looking at the envelope but not taking it. It felt like blood money, the price of her dignity. But the part of her that was a mother, the part that had to feed 3 mouths tomorrow, forced her hand to rise. She took the envelope, its crispness an insult. She said nothing. There were no words left. She met his gaze for a second, and in his eyes, she saw not malice, but the rigid fear of a man who served a master and would crush anything, even a grieving mother, that threatened his own position. She was a problem he had solved. Adjusting Comey's weight on her hip, she gripped Combs' hand tighter and walked past him, through the imposing gates she had entered with such momentous hope. The heavy wrought iron seemed to sigh shut behind them. The click of the lock a period at the end of a short, tragic sentence. They stood on the quiet, manicured street of Cooper Road, the billionaire mansions lining up like indifferent monuments. The sun was high, beating down on them. The bag was heavy on her shoulder. The envelope was a brick in her hand. The boys were a weight of despair in her heart. She had arrived here with a single bag and a world of hope. She was leaving with a single bag, 3 children, and a world in ruins. The dismissal was complete. The artistry was over. All that remained was the long, hot walk to the bus stop, and the even longer walk into a future that had just turned impossibly dark. The walk of shame. The gentle, tree-lined hush of Cooper Road felt like a mockery. Each step Adesawa took away from the gates was a step deeper into a crushing vacuum. The bag strap cut into her shoulder, a tangible anchor to her failure. Comey's weight on her hip, usually a comfort, now felt like the dead weight of her shattered dreams. Combe and Coma trudged beside her, their small sandals scuffing quietly on the pristine sidewalk, their heads bowed as if they, too, understood the magnitude of their disgrace. The tears had dried on her face, leaving tight, salty tracks. She didn't wipe them away. They were her insignia now, the brand of a woman who had dared to believe and had been cast out. The envelope of severance pay in her hand was not a lifeline. It was a sealed verdict, the final payment for her transgression of needing to be both a flawless artist and a mother. She replayed the scene in the foyer on a loop in her mind. Mr. Briggs's furious, fearful face, the echo of his shouts in the vast space, the way her sons had shrunk into themselves. The worst part was the quiet. The terrible, understanding quiet in the boys now. They weren't asking questions. They weren't begging for promises. They simply walked, their little hands in hers, bearing a punishment they didn't comprehend. They reached the corner where the serene silence of Cooper Road met the faint, growing murmur of the main thoroughfare. Here, the reality of their situation began to press in from all sides. The bus stop was still a 10-minute walk away. The sun, having no respect for tragedy, beat down with increased fervor. Comey began to whimper softly, overheated and distressed. "Mama, I'm tired," Combe mumbled, his bravado utterly gone. Adesawa stopped. She had no strength for this. No strength to coax, to carry on, to be the pillar. She gently set Comey down on a low, shaded wall, sinking down beside him as her legs finally gave way. The bag slumped to the ground. She pulled the boys close, creating a small, forlorn huddle on the edge of the luxurious avenue. She looked at them, their dusty clothes, their tear-streaked faces, their eyes filled with a confusion that mirrored the abyss inside her. This was what she had brought them to. From the trauma of loss in Corridor to the humiliation of exile here. She had traded one form of helplessness for another, more profound one. "I am sorry," she whispered again, the words useless and worn thin. "Mama is so sorry." Koma looked up at her, his thinker's mind still trying to piece it together. "Is it because we were not quiet shadows?" The question was a knife to the heart. "No, my love," she said, her voice breaking. "It was never your fault. It was mine. All mine." She pulled him close, kissing his forehead, wanting to absorb every ounce of their shared shame. They sat there for minutes that felt like hours, a silent island of despair in the stream of sleek, passing cars. Drivers in air-conditioned luxury glanced at them, a woman and 3 toddlers sitting on a wall with a giant bag, and looked away. They were a minor, inconvenient spectacle, a piece of the city's background poverty momentarily displaced into the realm of wealth. Adesawa stared at nothing, the fight gone out of her. The logistical nightmare of the next hour, the next day, loomed like a mountain. The hot, airless room in Suralire awaited them. The severance pay would last a month, maybe 2 if she stretched it to breaking. Then what? Back to the Yaba office? Begging for her old cleaning job? The thought was a nausea-inducing spiral. This was the walk of shame, not just from the house, but from the person she had begun to believe she could become. The capable provider, the valued artist, the mother who was building a legacy. That woman had been dismissed, erased as thoroughly as a smudge from one of Alhaji Danjuma's windows. With a monumental effort that drained the last of her spirit, she pushed herself to her feet. "Come, my lions," she said, the endearment now a painful reminder of a strength she no longer possessed. "We must go home." She shouldered the heavy bag once more, took their hands, and stepped off the curb, leaving the shade of the wall for the blinding, merciless heat of the open road. Each step was heavier than the last, a mechanical plodding towards a destination that offered no solace, only confinement. The grand gates of Cooper Road were now out of sight, but their imposing shadow stretched all the way down the street, all the way back to Suralire, all the way into the dark, uncertain future of the woman and the 3 little boys walking away from it all. The voice of grace. The walk was a slow, painful exodus. Adesawa's mind had shut down to a dull hum of despair, her body operating on the bare instinct to move forward, to put one foot in front of the other until they reached some form of shelter. The boys, exhausted and emotionally spent, had lapsed into a silent, plodding trance, their small hands slick in hers. They had just turned onto the slightly busier artery that led to the main bus route when the smooth, whispering sound of a powerful engine approached from behind. It was a sound that belonged to Cooper Road, not to this public thoroughfare. Adesawa instinctively pulled the children closer to the ragged edge of the sidewalk, making room for the luxury vehicle to pass. But the car didn't pass. It slowed, its tinted windows reflecting their own diminished figures. A sleek, black Bentley glided to a stop just ahead of them. Adesawa's heart, which had felt like a cold stone in her chest, gave a single, hard thump of dread. Had Mr. Briggs sent security? Was he ensuring they had truly left his domain? The rear passenger door opened. Alhaji Abdulaziz Danjuma stepped out. He was dressed differently than she had ever seen him, not in the relaxed kaftan of the house, but in a tailored navy blue suit, just returned from a meeting. He looked every inch the billionaire, a figure of immense power and unapproachable grace. And he was looking directly at her. For a suspended moment, the world ceased to turn. The noise of the distant traffic faded. Adesawa stood frozen, a deer in the headlights of her own ruin. The boys pressed against her legs, sensing the significance of this new, imposing presence. Adesawa. Her name, spoken in his calm, resonant bass, was not a shout. It was not an accusation. It was a simple, firm recognition, and it cut through the fog of her shame like a beacon. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. She simply stared, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of terror. This was the man whose trust she had betrayed, whose perfect sanctuary she had defiled. He had seen her artistry, and now he would see the consequences of her deceit. He took a few steps toward her, his expression unreadable. His gaze swept from her tear-stained, defeated face, down to the three small boys clinging to her, then to the overstuffed Ghana must-go bag at her feet, the undeniable evidence of a full, frantic retreat. "Why are you leaving?" he asked. His voice was still calm, but there was a note in it she had never heard, not anger, but a probing curiosity. He glanced again at the boys, a faint, almost imperceptible softening at the corners of his eyes, and with quite an escort. The kindness in his tone, the absence of immediate wrath, was so unexpected it broke the dam. A fresh sob, raw and uncontrollable, burst from Adessawa's chest. She tried to stifle it, pressing a hand to her mouth, but the tears came in a hot, silent flood. The sheer, unbearable contrast between his dignified composure and her total devastation was too much. Seeing her collapse, the boys began to cry again, soft, confused whimpers. Alhaji Danjuma's brow furrowed. He looked from her to the bag, to the direction from which they had come, and understanding began to dawn in his eyes. He had seen Mr. Briggs's particular brand of rigid, fear-based management before. "Wait here," he said, not unkindly. He turned and spoke a few quiet words to his driver, who remained in the car. Then he turned back to her. "Come," he said, gesturing back toward the side street that led to his house. "Come back inside, just to the gatehouse. Out of this sun." It was not a request. It was a command, but it was wrapped in a mercy so foreign Adessawa could not process it. Mechanically, numbly, she nodded. She picked up the heavy bag, but he reached out and took it from her, his hand brushing hers. The gesture, so simple, was profoundly shocking. The billionaire was carrying her bag. He led the small, ragged procession back down Cooper Road, not to the main gate, but to the open door of the gatehouse. Mr. Briggs, who had been watching their approach from the window, emerged, his face a palette of panic and confusion. "Sir, I can explain." "Silence, Briggs," Alhaji Danjuma said, his voice dropping a degree, the authority in it absolute. "Bring water for the children. And tea." He gestured for Adessawa to sit on a hard chair inside the gatehouse. She sank onto it, pulling the boys into the space between her knees, holding them as much for her own stability as theirs. Alhaji Danjuma pulled another chair and sat facing her, not behind the manager's imposing desk, but close. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped. "Now," he said, his voice low and steady, "tell me what happened. From the beginning." And so, with the boys sniffling quietly, with Mr. Briggs standing stiff and pale by the door, Adessawa told him. The words tumbled out in a broken, hiccuping rush. The death of Aunt Ibanabo, the desperate reunion, the impossible choice between her children and her job, the failed secret, the furious dismissal. She held nothing back, her humiliation complete. She spoke of her fear, her love, her catastrophic error in judgment. "I did not mean to disrespect your home, sir," she finished, her voice a shredded whisper. I only had nowhere else to put my heart." She looked down at the heads of her sons, unable to meet his gaze any longer, waiting for the final, dignified condemnation that would surely come. The silence in the gatehouse was thick. Then, Alhaji Danjuma let out a long, slow breath. He looked over at Mr. Briggs, his expression hardening. "You dismissed her for this?" "Sir, the rules, the children in the house. It was a severe breach," Mr. Briggs stammered. "The rules are for the care of my house," Alhaji Danjuma interrupted, his voice like cooled steel. "And no one has cared for it as she has. You saw a breach of protocol. I see a mother who was torn in two." He turned his gaze back to Adessawa, and the steel softened. "You should have come to me." The statement was so simple, so revolutionary, it left her speechless. Come to him. The idea had never occurred to her. He was the owner, a distant titan. One did not take problems to titans. He looked at the triplets, really looked at them for the first time. He saw their red-rimmed eyes, their identical faces etched with a confusion beyond their years. He saw the way they clung to their mother, the absolute center of their shattered universe. "So," he said, almost to himself. Then he nodded, a decision made. He looked at Adessawa, his eyes holding hers. "You are not dismissed." The four words hung in the air, luminous and impossible. They were a hand, reaching into the abyss where she was falling and closing around her wrist. "You will stay," Alhaji Danjuma continued, his voice firming with resolve. "You and your sons." He had seen her tears, heard her truth, and instead of confirming her banishment, he had called her back. The voice of Grace had spoken, and its first words were a pardon. The unlikely haven. The silence in the gatehouse shifted. It was no longer the heavy, judgmental quiet of moments before, but a suspended, breathless space where a new reality was being forged. Mr. Briggs stood like a statue carved from regret, his face ashen. Adesawa could only stare at Alhaji Danjuma, the words, "You are not dismissed," echoing in the hollowed-out chambers of her mind, not yet able to find purchase. Alhaji Danjuma's gaze moved past her, through the gatehouse window, to the compound beyond. His eyes settled on the boys' quarters, the self-contained two-bedroom apartment adjacent to the main house, currently empty and waiting. "That one," he said, pointing with a definitive nod. "The boys' quarters. You and your children will stay there." A jolt, like a weak electrical current, passed through Adesawa. "Sir, the quarters?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She glanced at Mr. Briggs, whose jaw was tightly clenched. This was a direct override, a fundamental rewriting of the rules he enforced. "It is clean, furnished, and it has its own entrance," Alhaji continued, his tone practical, as if he were solving a logistical puzzle. "There is a small, enclosed garden at the back where they can play. They will be safe. They will be with you." He looked at the boys, who were now peeking out from behind Adesawa's legs, their curiosity beginning to outweigh their fear at this strange, powerful man who spoke softly. "A house," he added, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, "needs the sound of life, even if it's from the garden next door." He then turned his attention fully to Mr. Briggs. The manager straightened under the weight of it. "Briggs, you will have the quarters prepared immediately. Fresh linens, whatever basic supplies are needed. You will also arrange for a reputable preschool in the area to be contacted next week. My office will cover the initial fees." He delivered the instructions not as a request, but as a settled fact. Each sentence was a plank laid across the chasm that had just swallowed Adesawa. A home, safety, education for her boys. It was too much. Her legs, which had been trembling, now threatened to give way entirely. She gripped the edges of the chair. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she breathed, tears of a completely new order, tears of a staggering, overwhelming reprieve welling in her eyes. "Say you will accept," Alhaji Danjuma said, his voice gentler now. "And tell these," he gestured to the triplets, "these fine young men that they can make noise in their new home. They have been shadows long enough." At the word shadows, Combs' head popped up fully. He looked from the imposing man to his mother, a spark of his old bravery returning. "We are lions," he stated, his voice small but clear. Alhaji Danjuma's smile became real then, a warm, crinkling at the eyes. "Even better. Lions should have a den of their own." He stood, the decision complete. "Briggs, see to it. Adesawa, settle them in. Your duties remain, but your hours will be adjusted. Your children come first." With a final, approving glance at the boys, he turned and walked back to his waiting Bentley, leaving behind a world utterly transformed. The gatehouse erupted into quiet, efficient action, but of a completely different kind. Mr. Briggs, chastened and pale, began barking orders into his radio for the quarters to be opened and cleaned, his earlier fury replaced by a stiff, dutiful haste. A junior staff member appeared with glasses of cold water and biscuits for the children, his eyes wide with curiosity. Adesawa just sat, holding her sons, drinking in the impossible turn of events. The heavy bag of exile still sat by the door, but it no longer symbolized an ending. It was just a bag, soon to be unpacked in a new home. Mr. Briggs himself, carrying a set of keys, led them across the manicured lawn to the boys' quarters. It was a neat, whitewashed bungalow with a small veranda, separate from but within the protective walls of the main compound. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. It was simple, but to Adesawa, it was a palace. A small sitting room, a kitchenette, 2 bedrooms, a clean, functional bathroom. Sunlight streamed through the windows onto tiled floors. It was space. It was safety. It was a haven carved out of her deepest despair by an act of bewildering grace. The boys, sensing the shift, let go of her and ventured inside. Coma immediately went to investigate the windows. Combe puffed out his chest, surveying the living room. "This is our den?" he asked. "Yes, my lion," Adesawa said, her voice thick. "This is our den." Mr. Briggs cleared his throat, placing the keys on a small table. Supplies will be brought. If you need anything." He trailed off, unable to meet her eye, and left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone, Adesawa walked slowly through the rooms. She touched the walls, the countertops, as if to confirm they were real. She looked out the back window to the small, walled garden, already picturing her boys playing there, within calling distance while she worked. She sank onto the sofa in the sitting room, and the boys clambered up beside her. The sobs that came this time were not of anguish, but of a profound, soul-deep release. She cried for Andibanabo. She cried for the fear and the shame. She cried for the mercy that had found her on a sun-baked street. Komi patted her cheek. "Don't cry, Mama," he said, his own tears forgotten. "The big man is nice." She pulled them all into a fierce, grateful embrace, burying her face in their hair, inhaling the scent of them. Her lions, her heart, now safely housed in an unlikely haven. The walk of shame had ended not in the dusty confines of Surulere, but here, within these walls. The dismissal had been rescinded, and in its place was something she had never dared to pray for: a second chance, a safe space, and the unspoken promise that her artistry and her motherhood were not crimes, but things worthy of shelter. A new beginning. The first dawn in the boys' quarters was not heralded by the stifling heat of Surulere or the profound, aching silence of the single room. It came with the soft chirping of birds in the compound's lush trees and a gentle, golden light filtering through the clean, curtained windows. Adesawa awoke on a proper bed, her body uncoiling from a sleep deeper and more peaceful than any she had known in years. For a disoriented moment, she listened to the new quiet. It was not empty. It was the quiet of safety, of walls that sheltered, not confined. Then she heard it, the soft, rustling whisper from the next room, a giggle hastily stifled, the creak of a bedspring, the sound of life. A smile, slow and genuine, spread across her face. She rose and padded to the doorway of the small second bedroom. There, in the twin beds that had been hastily arranged, her lions were awake. They were communicating in the hushed, excited sign language of children who know they are in a new, wonderful place and aren't quite sure of the rules. Koma pointed at a lizard on the ceiling. Komi mimed a giant's footsteps. Komi just hugged his pillow, beaming. "Good morning, noisemakers," Adesawa whispered. 3 heads swiveled towards her, and the whisper ban was instantly broken. "Mama, there's a lizard. Is this our house forever? Can we go to the garden?" The questions bubbled out of them, infused with a tentative joy that healed something cracked inside her. This was the sound Alhaji Danjuma had spoken of, the sound of life returning. Their new routine began that day, woven with threads of normalcy and extraordinary grace. After a breakfast cooked in their own small kitchen, Adesawa went to the main house to resume her duties. The air was different. Mr. Briggs gave her a stiff but respectful nod, his earlier fury replaced by a wary, formal correctness. The house itself seemed to welcome her back, its familiar surfaces awaiting her careful touch. But her work was no longer a desperate escape or a silent prayer. It was a job of gratitude, performed with a heart lightened by the knowledge that just a short walk away, her children were safe. She had arranged their toys in the enclosed garden, visible from the kitchen window. From the sunroom as she polished the glass, she could see flashes of them. Komi chasing a butterfly, Komi inspecting a line of ants, Komi contentedly digging in a small patch of dirt. The severance envelope, now a symbol of averted disaster, was safely tucked away. Her salary, the generous one affirmed by Alhaji Danjuma, was no longer just a lifeline. It was the foundation of a future she could finally see. A week later, true to his word, Alhaji Danjuma's office had made inquiries. A reputable, friendly preschool in nearby Ikoyi, one that catered to embassy staff and discerning locals, had a space for 3. The fees, covered for the first term, were a generosity that left Adesawa speechless. On the first day, she dressed her lions in their smartest clothes, the ones bought in that moment of crestwave joy, and walked them to the gates where a dedicated driver awaited. There were no tears, only wide-eyed excitement. They were going to big boy school. "Remember," Combs said, taking his brother's hands, "we are lions from the big house." They marched off, a small, brave trio, and Adesawa watched them go, her chest swelling with a pride so fierce it was almost painful. Life in the compound settled into a rhythm that felt like a dream woven into reality. The boys thrived. Their nightmares of Ikordu faded, replaced by tales of new friends and playground adventures. Their laughter in the garden became a familiar, welcome soundtrack to the afternoons. Adesawa's work remained impeccable, but it was now infused with a serene joy. She would sometimes find small, deliberate tokens left for her. A perfect rose from the garden placed on the cleaned kitchen counter. A book of poetry left open on the study desk with a passage about resilience gently underlined. Silent acknowledgments from the owner who had seen her not as a failure, but as a human being worthy of a second chance. One evening, as she sat on the veranda of the boys' quarters watching her sons race toy cars along the paving stones, Alhaji Danjuma emerged from the main house. He was dressed in a simple kaftan, taking his evening stroll. He paused at the edge of the lawn, observing the scene. Adesawa made to stand, but he waved a gentle hand. Please. He watched the boys for a moment, a quiet smile on his face. They have settled in well. Yes, sir. Better than I could have ever dreamed. Thank you, sir. For everything. He nodded, accepting her gratitude but seeming to brush it aside as something that needed no great mention. A house is made of bricks and mortar. A home is made of the people in it. You have given my house a sense of home, even from next door. He looked at her, his eyes wise and calm. And you have built your own. That is what matters. He continued his stroll, leaving her with those words echoing in the twilight. You have built your own. She looked at her lions, their faces alight with the last of the day's sun. She looked at the clean, solid walls of their quarters, at the main house, standing as a silent guardian. The journey from the single room of despair to this unlikely haven had been paved with loss, terror, and a desperation that had nearly broken her. But it had led here. The story of Adesawa and her triplets was no longer a tragedy. It was a testament to a mother's unyielding love, to the transformative power of unseen artistry, and to the monumental grace that can find a person on a hot sidewalk at their lowest point. It was a story of a new beginning, born not from an easy path, but from the profound, merciful decision of one man to offer shelter, turning a dismissal into a destiny, and a walk of shame into the first steps of a blessed, secure tomorrow. The future was no longer a terrifying abyss. It was the garden where her lions played, the safe walls around them, and the quiet, steadfast promise of days unfolding in peace. And so, dear reader, we close this chapter on Adesawa and her lions. From a single room of silent longing to a sun-drenched haven within guarded walls, their journey reminds us that even in life's most desperate storms, an anchor of grace can appear in the most unexpected harbor. We witnessed a mother's love, formidable as the ocean. We saw that true worth is often seen in the quiet dedication of our hands and the resilience of our spirit. And we were reminded that sometimes kindness is not a soft word, but a decisive act that rebuilds worlds. Thank you for walking this path with Adesawa, Koma, and Komi. Thank you for sharing in their tears, their fears, and their ultimate triumph. Their story may pause here, in a place of safety and newfound peace, but the echo of its hope remains. Thank you for watching.